In this video, I'm going to show you how I made a custom art piece for a large wall in my house. It's relatively straightforward and can be modified to fit almost any space you need something decorative. Let me go back to the beginning and show you how I did it. First off, let me show you the space before. All of the walls are green, but since I knew I would be doing a mountain scene with a lot of green in it, I first wanted to paint the wall to be something more neutral for the background, so I went with gray. This will be not only great for the colors of my project, but also a great accent color wall for the entire room. I moved everything back off the wall so that I could have plenty of space while painting. Then I started taping off things, starting with the window seals. For this and the baseboards, I'm using Scotch Sharp Line Painter's Tape, which is specifically designed for use on multiple surfaces, such as smooth or lightly textured walls, trim, baseboards, tile, and even glass. Then, when getting to the adjacent walls and the ceiling, I switched over to Scotch Delicate Tape. This is designed for use on surfaces such as painted drywall, but it could also be used for wood floors or wallpaper. It has a more gentle adhesive that won't pull up the paint once you go to remove it. It also has something called edge lock technology, which seals out paint to deliver the desired sharp paint lines. Once my surface was prepped, I painted. My personal technique is to first use a brush to create a border all around the wall, the windows, the ceiling, and baseboards. That way next I can come through with a roller and just color within a line. After letting that sit until dry, next I pulled up the painter's tape, then headed down to my shop to start cutting out mountains.
Real quick, I want to pause and thank this video sponsor, which is Raid Shadow Legends. Blah, blah, blah. If you like playing games, I'm sure by now you've heard of Raid Shadow Legends. Use my links below to check out Raid and download on your mobile phone or PC. They have a whole new world of amazing looking champions, all from their own factions. The first faction you're going to meet is called the Banner Lords. They're basically medieval knights with a massive kingdom that believe that they're good. But the orcs, ogrins, skinwalkers, and lizardmen would disagree. The lands of the Banner Lords were taken from the non-humans by force and kept them with the help of the Sacred Order. Now it may be time for those races to right an ancient wrong. Here are a few of the Banner Lord champions, and my favorite is Sathalia. This month, Raid just released a bunch of new clan features and improvements. If you want to get a huge head start in Raid, all you have to do is hit the link in the description or scan my QR code. And you'll get an epic hero, Chanaru, 200,000 silver, 1 XP boost, 1 energy refill, 1 ancient shard, and you can summon an awesome champion as soon as you get in the game. All of these rewards will be waiting for you here. Remember, links are down in the description.
When choosing material for this project, I was wanting something thin to cut down on weight and something easy to paint. I had a few cutoffs of 1/4-inch MDF left over from a previous project, so that's what I threw on my armor workbench to use. I personally always model up my project ideas before tackling them, and art projects are no exception. I spent around 2 hours getting the size, layout, and coloring down, so that whenever I get to the shop, I can pull reference lines, draw out triangles, and start cutting. I was able to get multiple mountains from 1 2x4 board, and I used my try and track saw to cut them out. Use my code April10 to get 10% off a stealth mask respirator, or use my code April to get $10 off a pair of IsoTunes Bluetooth hearing protection. Both products I fully stand behind. Next, I laid out all of my pieces to get a look. But of course, this would be simple to expand or shrink this idea by simply adding more mountains or taking some away. Here, let me climb up here quick to give you guys a tall person view. It doesn't look like much now, but let's move on to paint to jazz it up. I used my larger workbench for this task and first laid down paper because I certainly planned on making a mess. Now, when I paint MDF, I typically give it a seal coat first to seal the very porous material and stop it from absorbing a bunch of paint. My go-to for this is shellac. However, I didn't have any on hand and I didn't feel like stopping to go buy any. So instead, I gave all my pieces a quick coat of whatever color paint I had on hand, which in this case is green. After letting that base completely dry, then the real mess began. Now, I'm not an artist, but for this project, I actually did an evening's worth of research on abstract painting techniques to try and enhance the look of the project. I'll leave you a link to a few I found useful to watch. You can certainly just paint each one a solid color, but it was such a fun experience to try this new thing, this new way of thinking. where instead of having straightforward quote-unquote rules to follow, it's much more of a free-flowing and random process. I spent about 5 hours total painting my mountains because abstract art teaches the technique of layering colors. So I would give a part a treatment, then set it aside to dry, then give it another treatment. On some, I repeated multiple times. On others, I repeated just once or twice. I tried to vary the look of each one while sticking to my originally planned out color scheme. I mixed colors together, I mixed them with white. I tried to vary the look of each one while sticking to my originally planned out color scheme. I mixed colors together, I mixed them with white, varied my brush pressure and direction. And I also wasn't afraid to mess up. The great part about painting is you can always cover it up. However, if I liked it, I kept going in that direction. One of my favorite techniques, which was also one of the easiest, was to put 2 different colors on my brush. This was a very simple way to fade and blend colors together. After I had every mountain painted, I set it all aside until dry. The next day I started working on attaching things together to hang onto the wall. And let me show you my plan in my 3D modeling software first so that you can see what direction I'm going. I'll start with the back layers and build up to the front. Attaching all of these together, then screw this entire assembly to my wall. But to hide the screws from the view, but still keep them accessible, should I want to remove the piece later, I'll attach the front 4 mountains with French cleats. When putting it together in real life, it's important I get the spacing correct since I made it to fit my wall. I used my workbench to start laying out the parts, starting with the backmost layer, and used a tape to make sure the spacing matched my layout. Then I grabbed the parts to make up the second layer and attach them together. To do that, I used all of the scraps from making the mountains to make up some spacers. The spacers serve 2 purposes for me. 1, I wanted the top of the piece to have some sort of depth to it so that all the mountains were on the same plane. Then 2, it's also what holds one mountain to another. Anywhere a mountain would be overlapping, I could place a spacer to connect that portion to what was behind it. I used a combination of really quick setting rapid fuse to bond quickly, but also used some regular wood glue that takes about an hour to set up. I would figure out the placement needed by setting it on the main piece, but then take it over to my armor workbench to utilize my bench dog clamps to apply pressure. I repeated the same technique when those were dry and ready to attach to the main unit. Here, I would not only double check that my spacing in reality was lining up to the spacing of my digital model. Again, I don't want to build it larger than my wall. But I would also check the bottom with a scrap piece. I'm using my workbench to line up the bottom of the entire piece so that I can make sure it comes out with a nice straight bottom line. Since traditional clamps weren't useful here, I grabbed some weights I keep in my shop to apply pressure until the glue set up. Once it dried, I repeated on the next layer and the next, and this part was really fun to watch it all come together. While I was waiting on that to dry, I kept myself busy by making and attaching all of the French cleats needed. A French cleat is a hanging method that uses 2 45-degree angles to interlock together. I tilted my blade at a table saw, grabbed the largest scrap from cutting out the mountains, then cut every straight side on the weird shape. And this gave me a handful of cleats that I could next chop up and use. And I placed a cleat on the back of each one of the foremost front mountains. They're very lightweight, so I felt comfortable going with 1/4 inch MDF for this, but you could always upgrade to another material if you wanted. Either way, the thing to pay attention to here is it's attached parallel to the bottom edge of the triangle. This way your mountain will hang straight. I used a large square to reference the bottom edge while hanging them. A second thing to pay attention to is that it isn't upside down.
What happened?
I hung the French cleat upside down, so now my mountains will be like this.
Why'd you hang them upside down?
Because I'm dyslexic and I have a backwards brain.
And yes, I mounted all 4 that way before catching my mistake. Oh, good, yay! After correcting them to hang the correct way, I moved the entire thing inside to start installing on the wall. I used a stud finder to locate all my stud locations, then attached a 1x board to the studs. You could always mount the piece directly to the studs, but then you'll be required to place screws at certain locations on the piece. By first attaching a board that won't be seen, you can attach it to the studs, but then you can place screws anywhere on this board when you hang the mountains. And since I have very particular areas I'm able to hide the screws on the final result, I definitely wanted the option on placing my screws anywhere I wanted. Now I just needed to line it up left and right, then also top and bottom, and start screwing it into the board. For placement here, I was checking that not only the location would be hidden by the front row of mountains, but that I was also going into solid material of built-up spacers. I don't know if that makes sense, but remember that there's a lot of gaps between the mountains. You want your screw location to be where there are no gaps, but rather material that goes from the back all the way to the front. This way the screw has solid meat its entire length. We're not done, but let's step back for a second and take a look. Neat. All right, now let's cover up those screws. I don't know about you, but they would drive me crazy to look at. Hanging on the French cleats is very simple. I applied more glue and firmly pressed it into place. The important thing here is to make sure the bottom is aligned with the rest of the piece. And I would kind of cheat and place part B of the cleat into part A, then hold it all onto the wall. This way I could make sure I like the placement. If you don't want to mess with the cleats, you could always glue these mountains directly onto the piece.
Okay.
But then you won't have access to the screws should you want to remove the piece later. Guys, I must say, I love it. Honestly, I was so worried when I was painting the mountains that I was just making a big mess and making each piece weird and wonky. But truly, seeing them all together, I love the different textures and warm tones. Okay, I am still not done yet. So I hung it up so high because I planned on doing some, reflective mountains on the bottom side. This part will be painted directly onto my wall. And I think doing them in 3D would be nice, but in my setup here, if somebody were sitting up in bed, their head would hit anything on the wall. So that's what drove my decision to paint them on instead. This process was very simple. I once again used Scotch's delicate tape to make sure I got nice and crisp lines for these. I started by taping off everywhere I wanted a mountain, and then I got after it with paint. I didn't go crazy here with layering as I did before on the top, but I still added in multiple tones and colors to make it blend in. And you can see that edge lock technology working so well when you go to pull off the tape. I mean, just look at those lines. I know that this is slightly different than usual for me, but it is just as fun. For me, it's all about being able to look around my house and see only things I've done myself with my own two hands. It is so much fun tackling something new and thinking, how would I do that? Then diving into the learning process. And of course, sharing that process in case it's useful to somebody else.
Even if you don't create a mountain range, I really hope that this project has inspired you to get out into your shop and do something that's not your usual. I will see you on whatever I'm building next. If you're looking for a next project, I recommend this coffee table I designed that has adjustable heights. You can fold out the tall legs to eat from it, or you can tuck those up and bring out the shorter legs for it to be a standard coffee table. You can click here for plans and here to subscribe to the channel.